not about Russian, a Russian. It is actually about a model of the whole of Russia.
Model of the model. Cognitive achievement about Russian.
Well, my questions come back as always to what's the analysis and what's the synthesis. And Jason, I'm suspicious about your synthesis even before we start.
Yeah, of course. I always should be suspicious. That's the phenomena of life. Okay, Maurice, now we see a big M. Oh, we see you. Oh, welcome.
Hello, everybody.
Okay, so it's already 4 minutes late, so just go ahead. We have Maurice doing the first presentation today.
Okay. Just a minute. Hang on. This is the wrong one. One sec.
Psychohistory through informational realism.
It's the wrong.
So that you first needs to explain to us why you put a feature there and how this FIF is defined.
I'll tell you in a moment. I'm just looking. I produced two sets of slides. The second one, after you're suggesting that I need to define things better. So let me just see. How do I get out of this? Apologies for
the lower right-hand corner.
Yeah. Yeah, that's no good. Well, if it's the wrong one, I'll just have to make do. Okay. What is Fisher information field theory? Well, in 2022, I wrote a paper with Roy Frieden, who's in information. He's in information theory, and in particular worked in quantum areas of light. Because I'd come across his material in 1998, I think it was. And I bought his book. It was a very heavy maths book. And my first degree was in maths. So I haven't really used it for a long time, but I was interested enough to buy his book. He developed a theory about the nature of information underpinning reality. So we've been writing on and off, not very seriously, for since 94, I think. Since 98. And I used his theory in order to develop my own ideas. So I first came across the notion of hidden reality, which is all about complexity. And there are hidden aspects of reality that create influences on what we can see. This was explained quite nicely by Bohm, who talked about the implicate and the explicate. And the implicate is something which influences the explicate, which is what is visible. So in 2022, I think it was, I used my third order cybernetics model based on mindset agency theory to propose that autopoiesis, which is what defines mindset agency theory, and autopoiesis has been discussed by I'm a bit tired, you'll forgive me. Von Forster, when he was talking about, as in the 1970s, and when he was talking about stability of autopoiesis. So I posited that Fisher information could be used in order to ensure that stability occurs within autopoiesis, or at least identify a measure that enables you to determine when stability is not occurring. So that was not a non-mathematical paper, it was just some ideas I posited. And then last year, I thought of elaborating on Bohm's work and also continuing to develop Roy Frieden's work. Now, Roy Frieden said information, and he called it J information, underpins reality. And from that, you get observable reality, and that observable reality can then be measured. Now, he used Fisher information in order to make sure that what you measure was actually what there is, so it avoided errors. I modified that by applying it to Bohm's implicate, and that was then developed in order to explain how mindset agency theory works. So I'll come back to Fisher information theory in a moment. So I think first we'll look at some definitions of terms. So the purpose of this presentation is to introduce a formal diagnostic framework. And when I say formal, it's actually properly defined, but then I branched out into mathematics. So the mathematics is, to a lot of people, will be unreadable, but it has a basis that creates a respectable formal framework that apparently works. So I applied it to psychohistory in order to inquire into the Russian-US relationship. Now, I'll come on in a minute to what Fisher information field theory is, but it is based on third-order cybernetics. The third-order cybernetics that was defined originally by Eric Schwartz in 1988, and which I've been developing ever since. So, information realism is a philosophical view that information, not matter or energy, is the fundamental organizing principle of reality, and it's related to critical realism. Fisher information is a statistical measure of the amount of information that an observable random variable carries about an unknown parameter. This is actually modified because when you apply it to the implicate, you can't see what is happening. Everything in the implicate is invisible to us, but we know it's occurring. It's like thinking is invisible to us, but we know what the consequences are. Fisher information field theory.
Your slide is invisible now.
My slide is gone.
Yeah, your slide become invisible when you mentioned the word invisible.
Oh dear. Oh dear.
So maybe you can scroll down it. Redo. Yeah,
Can you
it's
see
back.
everything? Okay.
Yeah, it is back, but you have a little block on the right of your screen.
Okay. Well, for some reason, I don't know what's happening with this. Can you see this? The
Yeah, we can
diagram.
see most part of it. Yeah.
I don't know what's happening. Hang on. Maybe I can do something.
Perhaps you need to reboot.
Can you see now?
Well,
Is that better?
you're
It's still got a dark gray box covered part of your text, but we can see most part, like the left and the middle part. There's something
No.
strangely going on the left side, on the right
On
side.
the left.
It
Forget
may
the right. Forget the right.
Maybe a Zoom
We'll just-
glitch. If you
We'll just talk
stop
about
sharing
the
and share again.
Yeah, okay, I'll try that.
Need to buy a new computer.
Well, this is only 2 years old. Can you see that? No.
I think it's necessary that you stop screen sharing completely and
Okay,
renew the
okay.
screen sharing.
Stop share. Done.
Yes.
Okay, let's try again. Yeah.
Yeah, correct this time.
Okay, can you see that?
Yeah,
Yes.
this is perfect this time.
Okay, so we've got Fisher information field theory, which says that instead of just information, it's actually information fields. And the idea is that there are 3 fields which are related to my original 3 systems, but there are 2 dimensions to each field. One is some activation, and the other is sets of parameters that influence the activation. We'll come on to that in a minute. Mindset agency theory, some of you will have seen before. You've got a cybernetic model of collective agency, which I in my book with Gerhard Fink, we applied to psychology, and we demonstrated that we could actually explore the psyche of individuals or of organizations. And in fact, I produced some papers, several papers, diagnosing organizations. One, which I think is quite good, was ASEAN. And that explores what the issues are using that methodology. Autopoiesis is the connector between what I call the operative and the dispositional dimensions. And that is fundamental to this whole mechanism of imperative theory, which is what I call the next step. That is a diagnostic framework using Fisher information fields, and they have various variables attached to them, including curvature, sensitivity, resonance, amplification, torsion, etc. I won't go into that. I realized after I'd finished creating Fisher information field theory, and that's actually a paper that I put as a preprint on the web, and that is 200 pages. So it took me 200 pages to define what Fisher information field theory is. I then went on to say, well, going back to my 2022 paper, we've got to try and consider what happens during autopoiesis. And I've been saying that when you have change in an environment from a system, a living system, and it doesn't have to be a biological system, it can be any complex adaptive system with autopoiesis, then you have if that has got to be stable, if autopoiesis has got to be stable, you really need to measure whether it is or not. So I used Fisher information as an idea to do that. And that led me to using Fisher information in order to construct what I call the I field, or the operative field. Now, the operative field isn't reality, it's a potential for reality. So you have lots of possibilities that can be generated as reality, and they're structured possibilities. Imperative theory then says, well, if a change in the environment occurs and autopoiesis feedback to disposition says, hey, wait a minute, something's going on, I've got to devise a new way of restructuring, that'll send an imperative to the operative system to modify the structure. So that's where it originates. So now you know where the notion of imperative theory comes from. But then I developed that mathematically as a diagnostic framework. And that is, I think it also has taken a lot of pages. I can't remember how many. From there, I realized that there was another issue, that I hadn't taken into account what happens when small issues occur, like, for instance, the No Kings demonstration in the States. A small incident like that could suddenly erupt into something much greater. And this is, in chaos theory, this is called the butterfly effect. So I then developed imperative theory to capture some mechanisms for the butterfly effect. And I developed a mechanism by which I could trace how the small changes actually became large changes, and I could determine whether they would in fact become large changes, whether a butterfly flapping its wings in Hawaii might result in a change in weather in Brazil. Whatever the normal is, to explain the butterfly effect, I can't recall. And I found a way of tracing the micro changes into the macro changes using that theory. This is all based on Fisher information field theory, where all the hard work is done by Fisher information. Part of that is curvature. Now, curvature is really something which relates disposition to operations. So that is really a stability function. Again, if what the if information from disposition gets passed autopoietically to the operative structure, then we end up with a Fisher information value, which is called curvature. That's all it is. So let me move on. Here we have the picture on the left. Now that picture demonstrates the whole of mindset agent theory applied within Fisher information. So we have the operative, the dispositional, and the sustentative domains. The operative, they're all invisible because they're all hidden. And the only thing you can see is what is in the corporeal domain, where the invisible component is manifested through imperatives into the real world. And you will see that in each of these domains, there is an implicate and an explicate. In the corporeal, the explicate is observable. In the implicate, it's conditioning. So the implicate might, if we're talking about the universe, we might be talking, the explicate might be galaxies or objects that you can see in the universe, and the implicate might be gravitation or other types of fields. Then we go to the hidden part, which I call the incorporeal, and that has the operative domain has, again, the implicate and the explicate. The implicate has parameters. Now, in the past, when I've modeled mindset agency theory, I have only concentrated on the implicate. So I have looked at traits. Now, those traits are traits that reflect human conditions. And together with Gerhard Fink, we actually produced 14 different traits, one in cognition, which is all about information processing, and the other about affect, which includes emotion. So I developed that further, and I published a paper in 2024 in economics, which then introduced a spirit dimension, also called cognitive, because that provided a means by which cognition and affect could relate to each other and define a pathway. So in another paper, I think it was also in 2022, I talked about consciousness, sapience, and sentience, and I explained that consciousness arises from, in a sense, really, cognition and affect. I actually talked about it in terms of sensate and sapience. So now we have a role for those three things that I call aspects, and they surround all of these different domains. So each domain has its own trait in the hidden area, and with the spirit, you end up with 21 traits. We've used that in order to investigate various organizations and individuals. And in one study, I investigated Trump. That was in my 2021 book with Fink. And we demonstrated how he was, let's say, not as well as he might be. So the implicate and explicate in the dispositional are not quite the same, because while in the operative domain they are structured, in the dispositional they are not. They are unstructured, and they are all over the place, mixed. And all of these domains are in superposition. That's relating to, that really borrowed from quantum theory, but in fact, I argued that it underpins quantum theory. The sustentative is the overall controller, where in social science one would call it culture, and that controls what happens between the others. So, why don't, at this point, does anybody want to ask a question?
Yeah, what will be the dynamic between implicate and explicate? Do they transfer with each other? I mean, does one
Okay.
turns into another
Yeah.
via some magic?
They are, yes, it is magic. They are highly connected. Um, um, the anything that happens in the explicate is reflected in the implicate and vice versa. The implicate is a conditioner for the explicate. So if you've got parameters in the implicate, for instance, in the I field, you change the parameters and the explicate changes. The
Could,
same happens in the J field.
could
Yeah.
you just simply give a mathematical example of how this connection between implicate and explicate works in your mathematics?
And
I have to.
also, how did you measure the implicate part? I mean, if it's
Check.
not visible.
Um, the in one of my papers, the long one, it's actually, I think we're talking about, well, it's a 200-page paper, and it's got, at a guess, I'm not sure, maybe 60 pages of mathematics. I can't pick it up straight away, but there is a mathematical relationship that can be defined. In fact, I can do better than just talk about the implicate explicate in any domain. I can also tell you there are two types of implicate explicate relationship. The relationship, Bohm only talked about implicate explicate orders. I modified that to talk about lateral implicate explicate relationships, which is contained within a domain, and transverse relationships, which is the relationship between the incorporeal and the corporeal. So it's the same mechanism, but only at a different scale.
Any relationship? Is there any relationship between Rena Tom's catastrophic theory that's also mathematically at least having graphs to illustrate the change dynamics? Is your theory connected more or less with that one?
No, my theory comes from fundamentally the relationship between disposition and operative. The relationship between J and I. Roy Frieden developed a maximum principle, which said the relationship between J and I was that J minus I, and this is not a quantitative, it's a qualitative relationship, has to be a maximum. And that means that when that happens, Fisher information is good to explain what is happening. I've done it slightly differently. I've related dispositional with with operative, and that gives me a different relationship. It's J divided by I, and that relationship needs to be relatively small if autopoiesis is going to be valid and be stable. And if it's very large, you might end up with instabilities. So that's the basis of my theory. And at the very end of these slides, I put a table in which shows you the mathematics for each of the variables, just briefly. So when we have a look, we can see.
Could you at least say, when you say the notion of mathematics itself is a very, very broad notion. So when you talk about the relationships, Are you talking in terms of topological relationships, categorical relationships, vector relationships? What sort of relationships are you referring to?
Topological. This is a topological model.
What?
Topological.
model.
He said the topological.
A topological, okay.
Yeah. That's defined by the diagram. Each domain has a different being, a different nature. So that's the nature of the structure. So let me go on. Here, I'm not going to go through this, but these, we've got tangible and intangible. We've got operative, dispositional, and substantive. And these are paired extremals for each trait. The name of the trait isn't important. Had I put the name of the trait in, it would have been hardly readable. But this pairing is very important because one dimension is tangible and the other dimension is intangible. And that is a fundamental principle of the theory that I built. And there are three aspects: cognition, affect, and spirit or chronation. And they determine the traits that occur in the previous model. So let's move on. So I've applied this to the US-Russian relations. The first thing I must say is that I developed this over 2 papers. The first paper, I used only a single generator for the information, and I developed a way of doing that using AI. So I didn't collect data, I got the AI to collect data. Now, that is problematic because AIs are biased. You don't always know what they're doing. And I therefore developed a mechanism whereby you use an ensemble of AIs and you operate them independently and check one against the other. That eliminates bias, or tries to. In theory, the larger number of AIs you use, the less bias you probably have in the generation of data. But when I used imperative theory to look at the relationships, I only used one AI. When I developed that further to introduce butterfly theory, as I call it, I've actually used 3 AIs, and each confirmed the others that were within some bounds. Okay. So what does this? So basically, what I've actually done, I call this a proof of concept, rather than this actually being the real outcomes, because I haven't yet made the comparisons of the data with using other AIs and other LLMs. So psychohistory is the interdisciplinary study that applies psychology, especially psychoanalysis, to explain the unconscious motivations behind the actions of individuals, groups, and nations. There's some, I can't see all of this because pictures are deleting it. The symbolic, and by the word symbolic, I really mean hidden. Holland was the first person in complexity theory to discuss the hidden dimensions of what we see, and that's consistent with Boehm's work. So we've got the overarching theme. Psychohistorical diagnostics is a method for understanding long-term agency behavior. You've got an analytical perspective, and that's in imperative theory, grounded in information theory. You've got the core concept, which is symbolic dynamics as a carrier of legitimacy. Really, by legitimacy, I really mean viability. Identity and power across geopolitical spaces. You've got diagnostic approach. So we've got a number of variables that can identify what is happening in the fields that constitute the social environments that I'm exploring. One of the fields is called information inertia. And the idea is that if you've got an information field that people have been, that defines how a sociocultural works, then that information field has an inertia. And that inertia projects into the future until it doesn't. Something may happen to stop it projecting. Everything may change. The fields may shift, so it doesn't project. But the idea is if we can find values for information inertia, then we can determine whether or not there's going to be a projection of the current sociocultural organization into the future, or if there are going to be changes within it. It's the ontological foundation. Information fields recognize a pre-quantum phenomena. In other words, if you know anything about quantum theory, then a lot of the theory that is defined within quantum theory is also represented within the fields. And the application here is to provide a cybernetic description of US-Russian relations that reveals hidden information structures missed by conventional analysis. So I won't go through all of this because I don't know how far, what's the time? We've probably, I've gone over anyway. Imperative theory is, I described it, and the Fisher information defines values that one talks about as curvature. Butterfly theory uses the relationship between J and I as curvature to identify what small changes can occur. And this, in the mathematics, is developed by differentials of the relationship between J and I. And I'll come on to that shortly. So if we look at the case study of the USSR, we've got, and remember this is proof of concept, so it's not necessarily a prediction. Well, it's not a prediction at all. It's an anticipation because we're using the current dynamics that have been identified within the system to project what is likely to happen, and you can assign probabilities to that. So civilizational agency fields are subject to mounting symbolic pressure. Fisher information curvature acts as the diagnostic substrate, measuring sensitivity to stress. You get outcome bifurcates. Systems either absorb stress or tip into cascades, transforming therefore. In the West, we've got fragmentation, dispersive symbolic pressures, eroding institutional trust, and weakening legitimacy. We got, this all derives from the traits. So the effects, the aspects of cognition, affect, and spirit, or cognition, that you've got collective coherence anchors symbolic identity. In other words, symbolic, remember we're talking about the invisible components, the operative potential, disposition, and if you want, culture. And affect can stabilize emotional fields. You've got stimulation, amplification, etc. You've got pragmatic enhancement, which sustains, it's not legitimacy, it's viability. So you can, using the spirit conation idea, you can try to determine whether or not your system is pursuing viability tract or not. Okay. conclusions. Symbolic dynamics reveal it's not legitimacy. Read legitimacy as viability. Crisis, NATO expansion, Crimea, sanctions, Ukraine war, diagnostic traits showed recurrent stress thresholds. Cascades were reproducible. Escalation patterns matched imperative theory predictions. The next decade anticipated symbolic shifts. Russia's identity is consolidation versus Western fragmentation. So what that suggests is that Russian identity will be consolidated as the West gets fragmented. Now, that's not going to be that's not a prediction. That there are optional outcomes, probabilistic outcomes, and this is just a quick summary. It's sort of thing that one can do, and in this short talk, it's really impossible to take you through it. And to be honest, I haven't had a lot of time to prepare these slides because I only got back from Brussels at the weekend, and I haven't done these before, so it was rather a pressured job, I'm afraid. So here we have probabilistic diagnostic table. So 70% chance of cohesion strengthens legitimacy, not legitimacy, talk about viability, lowers fragility, curvature, and stabilizes civilizational order. Again, these different probabilities that arise from doing the analysis of the variables. I think if I am it's a different. It's another table. Unfortunately, the one I prepared in favor of this one. Do you mind if I try and find it? Or do you want any
can you
questions?
flip back a few pages? There's something I would like to hear back.
For that?
Back. Wait a minute. Maybe there's one page in the last line you mentioned that's using the theory reveal some hidden structure.
Yeah, this is the hidden structure.
A hidden structure. If you could explain that to us more.
Okay. You know, in the book,
I think it's our next one.
yeah, the next one coming below, this one.
The last I remember, just to briefly, next one maybe. Hidden structure. Hidden here. Application. Provide a cybernetic description of US-Russian relations that reveals hidden informational structure missed by conventional analysis and missed by all of us. So can you highlight that one?
Sorry, which
to
line
show
is
the
it?
power?
Which
Where
line is
are
it?
those hidden information structure? What is that? Can you let us know more about that?
Hidden information structure is the one I just showed you. Can I go back?
Yeah.
These are fields. This is all hidden. This is what goes on in our heads. In fact, the
But
basis of
exactly in the Russian case, what's in those areas?
Okay, look, operative is, think of the department, think of a business organization. The operative is the description of the organization. It's not real, but you know what the departments are, and you've got, in the corporeal, you've got a building and you've got doors. And if you project the operative onto the corporeal, what you find is signs on the doors. So you have department, and you've got a department head, and these are conceptual ideas, which are then applied into corporeal and become emergent in the real world. And you have a head of department, and you have other people who are doing tasks in the real world that you can see, but these are defined by the operative system, which you can't see because it's invisible. You can only, in the same way that you can't see the information that, if you think about narrative is something that occurs in the corporeal, because I am talking and it's something that you can hear, and it has its basis in the operative, because the meanings of what I'm saying are defined there. You can't see my meanings. You have to determine what they are by transforming my narrative into something you can understand. And unless my narrative is adequate, that's a difficult problem. So far, I don't think my narrative has been adequate to provide the meaning that is required in this small group. But that's where the hidden domain is. So we have the operative is hidden, but it's potentially emergent. The disposition is really about the ideas, the goals that make the operative possible. And the sustentative is like the culture that enables those goals to be formulated and enables you to implement the structures. And
yes, culture, specific culture.
Yeah. So in social systems, you would have the sustentative as culture, you would have the dispositional as ideas and goals and plans, and you would have the operative as intended structures that can be applied. Now, these are all these fields are in superposition, which means there may be a lot of different meanings there, and which one becomes fact, becomes what we can observe, depends on context. So what happens in the real world influences what happens in the hidden world. And then the hidden world responds. And if something is going on in the real world which endangers viability, then we have a response and an imperative to make changes in the structure, which then change the real world. So if the marketing department, instead of marketing their products, is trying to sell their machine, then you've got ambiguity going on and conflict. And what you need to do is create a policy that disallows salesmen, marketeers trying to sell their machine, otherwise to stop that confusion. So that is the relationship between the hidden and the observable.
Maurice, let me point out that a similar problem or conflict or tension exists in the logic of chemistry, where the relationships between the individual objects is obscure, it's inobservable, it's not observable. But the distinction I see here is that the taxonomy of chemistry is very clear through the table of elements. So my question then is, do you have a taxonomy to relate these different topological forms?
That's the taxonomy.
So that is your taxonomy.
Yeah.
And it's complete with respect to the topologies involved.
Yes. you've got cognition, affect, and spirit cognition, and each one has got seven traits. And because each trait has two poles, one being tangible and the other intangible, you end up with a lot of options. For instance, take hierarchy and egalitarianism. Now, you can have one trait which has both, a degree of both. In fact, that means that you can have an infinite amount of hierarchy, an infinite amount of difference in different organizations or different people with different perspectives of what they believe is good, is hierarchy, and what they believe is egalitarian. So in terms of beliefs, some people say, oh, hierarchy is important. And other people might say, oh, egalitarianism is important. Some people might say, well, they're both important. And then other people might say they're both important to different degrees. So you have lots of variation.
Yes, Maurice, but let's push that further. So your assertion then, as I understand this set of terms that you have on this page, is that there are somewhere within the semantics of the explicit order, there's some sort of word-forming elements in the sense of René Thom that will generate these terms.
Yeah,
so
the
semantics of the language you're using some way creates word-forming elements such that these terms emerge in the implicate order.
Yeah, I think you can say that.
That's helpful.
You can do, yeah.
So then the presumed taxonomy here is grounded in say the ordinary use of language.
It's grounded in meanings.
Yeah, in the meaning of meanings.
Yeah, that's right.
Not just meaning itself, but the meanings of the meanings, or the meanings of the meanings of the meanings, or some other hierarchical.
I think I would like to have had you as a partner to write this. Yes, that's good.
Can you flip back to your conceptual map? There's a lot of circles. The one.
Yeah. So
where would you put value system here?
Okay, here in the implicate. Oops, in the implicate here. Let me just say one other thing. I've also integrated hologram theory, so that everything is of this whole system is represented in the sustentative, in the implicate. So the implicate has a picture of the whole system. That's why it's able to control what is happening in autopoiesis and autopraxis. So the implicate, if we go to the operative, the implicate has the parameters. So if we go back to the taxonomy, those parameters are affect. You've got the operative parameters. So let's go back here. So the operative parameters, these are the operative parameters. So we've only got grammatizing and patterning and Gesellschaft, Gemeinschaft within the operative domain.
Okay.
And they
let's go back to the chemistry for a moment as a alternative representation. So if I understood the last slide, the taxonomy slide correctly, you're saying that the effect, that is the expletive order or structure, is a consequence of the affect. So the affect is now the dominant source of the effect in the expletive order. Is that correct?
I don't talk about effect and affect. I talk about affect as having valence, having emotion, and that is a whole strand, because if you think about people, people have cognition, but they also have affect, and that affect is emotional and other things. So they live on cognition and they behave also through emotion or affect. So these two aspects are fundamental to the way in which they behave. I tell you, the problem is.
Well, before we leave that one last time, and then I'll stop. So that your notion of Fisher information theory is one of as a field, is information theory as a continuous field. So you're not using the discrete topology.
Yeah, that occurs in the explicate. Now, the explicate is an activization of the implicate. In other words, it's a field, and where you have
a mathematical field.
You could think of it as a mathematical field.
A physical field.
No, it's all in the incorporeal.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Well, but I still have a problem of if anything implicate, how could you nail it down? I mean, any ways to measure it, or it's inferred, or how did you get that?
You measure it through proxies. In my paper on imperative theory, I look at a forest, and I look at it's not the chemistry, but it's partly chemistry. I look at the mechanisms that are occurring within the forest, and I get proxies for these different implicate aspects and the explicate aspects. So everything is done through proxy. It's the same with culture. You can't measure culture. You can only measure proxies, because you can't look at culture. Culture only occurs through behavior. Culture is manifested through behavior, and so you need proxies to try and determine or impute what the culture is that somebody is coming from when they behave.
So next time you should give us a list of proxies.
Yeah, well, it depends. It depends what field you're dealing with. If you go to the imperative theory paper and look at forests, and that's only about 5 pages, I think. If you look at that, it explains what is happening in the forest, and then it provides you with proxies that relate to each of these hidden aspects.
I struggled through your 500-page 2021 book, and one thing that struck me is it didn't seem to boil down to simple building blocks. You know, I kept seeing complexity wherever I went. It seemed to it just remained slightly rubber everywhere I looked. And I'm just wondering, is that a sign that maybe it's not the optimal way to cut the pie?
Maybe you need a rubber knife.
That's why we are here. I mean, Lawrence, that's why we want to work his complicated building of a maze into something handable. I mean,
to be honest,
maybe my talk later will contribute a little bit. May capture one of the implicates. Are you ready for that?
Yeah.
You mean you no questions for Maurice?
Did you finish, Maurice?
Sorry, what were you asking for?
Have you finished your slides before we leave?
I finished these slides, they're the wrong ones. I had some others which showed at the very end how you measure curvature and the differentials. So you can measure the different things that determine, mathematically, that determine these different variables and enable you to estimate what is happening and make and anticipate how people are going to behave. These are the earlier slides, and I decided, because I sent them to Jason, he said, "You're not defining anything there. You better rethink." So, as he would. So, I redid the slides, but I can't seem to find them.
Okay.
They're there somewhere.
Okay.
I could try quickly, if you want, to try and get rid of this and find the others, if you'd like me to.
Well, before you leave here, I think the point that I find most discomfort with in terms of the language, and this is what I think Lauren was referring to as well, is that you start with the notion of Fisher information theory. And this one assumes, because of the nature of information theory, that you are now using a discrete field, whatever that might mean in terms of psychology, I don't know. But my interpretation of the notion of Fisher information theory as you're talking about some sort of discrete mathematical field and hence a discrete topology. And all of that then would infer some notion of set theory and such relationships among sets. And that's where I find this transition then between implicate and explicate to be, as Lauren said, cutting with a knife that I don't understand.
Okay. It follows the explicate is a field of directional vectors, if you want, which are influenced by parameters in the implicate. And they can be manifested in, if we're talking about dispositional, you can't actually discover those parameters. You can't even discover the vectors that are occurring because they're not structured. But what happens in the theory is that somebody in the corporeal, just one sec. No, you can't. I'll leave that. Someone in the corporeal field. Can you forgive me? I need to take this, maybe, because I'm supposed to be visiting a hospital tomorrow. So one sec. Hello?
Okay, Gary, Jerry, you continue your comment when he was.
Well,
Kenneth?
there are many similarities here between cybernetics as used in chemistry, or quantum theory as it's used in chemistry, and the languaging that he is using. The distinction, at least within the notion of chemistry, is that the explicit observables are indeed observable. That is, you can measure them in the laboratory. And you can measure these by either, for example, thermodynamic parameters or quantum parameters or other property parameters are emergent from the implicate order. If that makes sense to you, Jason, so that you do
Exactly.
you do the so-called atomic reduction to get to the atomic numbers, but these atomic numbers are then operators that you can then construct things with. And these are atomic operators are constructible objects in the real world. And so you can then measure these constructed objects as the explicate order within the language, for example, of molecular biology, and come up with objects such as DNA.
I totally agree with you. Actually, in my perception, I think chemistry and even biology are the most stable cognitive results. I mean, we can be pretty much sure about the result. It's even more stable than physics. If once you get into the quantum area, then suddenly things are just becoming elusive. And so I totally agree with you that the chemistry part is the most reliable and stable truth, so to speak, that our mind can build up, and everything on the different terminals are kind of loose. But anyway, I think Maurice is doing a very interesting exploration. His first challenge is he has to make us here understand before he can make the world understand.
Well, that's true. The problem is, you see, in chemistry, you've only got two dimensions. You've got the corporeal and you've got the incorporeal. And the incorporeal is actually what I call the transverse implicate, and the corporeal is the transverse explicate. So that's chemistry, that's simple. But in this structure,
let's stop there. Let's stop there and talk about the transverse, because it is precisely this transverse that gives chemistry the possibility of relating the, shall we say, the external mass, that which you measure in the laboratory as say a piece of diamond or a piece of gold or a piece of uranium, as being the transverse object from the atomic number, which would then be, in this language, the implicate order of that. But now the association is between atoms and, if you would, molecules. And this is a concrete mapping between the discrete numbers of the atomic table of elements and the normal mathematics of discrete mathematics of objects in the world, which may be, if you want, continuous objects if you so desire. That's where the transversion becomes crucial. And it actually turns out to be the distinction between Coulomb's law, which expresses the relationship between positive and negative charges, and gravitational law, which only concerns one object, that is the mass. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but that's not the model that I'm using.
I know, exactly. Exactly my point.
No, Jerry, gravity is not just one object. You can think of it as mutual attractive or repulsive forces between two masses.
Oh, well,
in which case it becomes the charge and the mass are kind of interchangeable. It depends on your viewpoint.
That's a categorical error on your part, Ram.
No.
There is no categorical.
Sorry, I disagree with you.
Well, I know you do, but let me finish my argument. Okay, that if you just represent mass by Newton's law of attraction, that's the only force you have available to you from a gravitational perspective. Now, if you use Coulomb's law, you end up with two notions of force. That is, attractive forces between opposite charges or repulsive forces between similar charges. So these are two different representations of force, and they are not exchangeable. There's no way you can go from one to the other without imagining that these are the same sorts of forces.
And we have discussed this, quite a bit. My fundamental thing is, if you think of anything as a network, the fundamental canonical microcircuit of a network must have two nodes, not one node. So whether you're looking at it as a charge or a mass, you need two entities And using the cybernetics language, if you think of it as communication or